dive into world building. Today we have a super special guest, author Megan O'Keefe, who has joined us to talk about her new novel. When did it come out, Megan?
It actually doesn't come out until January 5th. So
Oh my gosh, so it's not even out yet. We are like getting a peek into the future.
Yep.
And the book is called Steal the Sky. And I know it has airships in it.
It definitely does. It has at least two.
At least two. Awesome. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the plot to kind of orient us to what we're talking about, since nobody has read it. Except for
Not
me.
even me. So, Steal the Sky is primarily about a con man and his best friend who show up in an outpost city, and they decide they're going to try and steal the airship of a very, very mean lady, and things kind of go sideways from there. They get involved with the city watch and stick their foot into a coup that was going on that they weren't aware of, and it's a lot of fun. It's very fast-paced, and yeah, a lot of heist and hijinks.
Heists and hijinks, both of them very good H words. Sounds awesome. Now, I'm not sure how you feel about spoilers here, so maybe I should get a read on you there.
I will try to avoid them for the sake of people, because the book isn't even out yet. So.
Right, exactly. Well, okay, so we're going to try to make this thing sound just amazing and talk about the world building in a little bit of detail, but not give away super important information. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, so I happen to know that your airships in this world don't work exactly the way that airships might be expected to work. And I'm taking a guess at how this word is pronounced. I'm guessing that once people actually start reading the book, they will come down on two sides of a line in terms of pronunciation. It will either be Celium or it will be Celium, and there will be battles in the streets over which pronunciation is correct.
Yeah, you are correct. I say Celium. I know my agents and editor have both flipped back and forth on which one they say. I am generally of the opinion that fantasy words are fantasy words and readers can pronounce them however they feel like. So I will stay out of that particular battle.
So tell us a little bit about Celium.
So Celium is a gas that is mined through what in this world is called a fire mount. They're basically volcanoes. And Celium exists in the bedrock of the world. It is kind of threaded throughout the continent, the actual crust of the continents. And when it comes in contact with very, very, very hot magma, it rises up into pockets along the venting chamber of the fire mount. And the people there realize that this stuff is pretty valuable for lifting airships and sort of influencing trade, so they go through the incredibly dangerous process of mining it from the fire mounts. To do this, they use their world's magic users, which are called cell sensitives, because they're capable of manipulating it. They can kind of smush it into shapes and move it along pipeways and that sort of thing.
Okay, so it's an element, but it also is connected to a type of magic user,
yes,
which I think is kind of interesting.
Yeah, when it comes to my magic systems, I like to say I'm sort of allergic to the Aristotelian elements, you know, the fire, earth, wind, that kind of thing. I like to go as weird as possible.
Yeah, I hear you. Those have been done quite a number of times. So, you know, let's branch out here. We're definitely branching out. I am over here writing down notes, by the way, because after we have our chat, I'm gonna write this down so that people who don't want to watch an hour of video can go to my blog and read up on what we talked about and learn about your book without actually having to sit down and dedicate an hour to listening to us chit chat. So okay, so let's see. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you came up with the idea for Stellium and for the magic users, and how you kind of dug into that a little bit.
So, I knew I wanted to have this gas, and I knew I needed people who had the ability to manipulate it.
Mhm.
But I also felt that just having the ability to manipulate it is a little too easy.
Mhm.
So some of them can do other things with it, some more useful than others. Some of it can change it just the color of it to just one color. Some of them can change it to lots of different colors.
Mhm.
Um, some of them can do more destructive things with it. It really it varies quite wildly. The empire involved in the mining process likes their one kind of cell sensitive because that's the kind that can fly the ships and move things and not be dangerous and subversive.
Okay.
They try to keep their cell sensitives to just this one type, and they do pogroms, unfortunately, and that sort of thing to get rid of the ones they don't like.
Mhm.
Um, and I like to have some sort of limitation in my magic system, of course, and if you use your cell ability a little too much, you end up with something called bone wither, which is like an osteoporosis. Your bones will start to break down and become a little more
Okay.
fragile over time.
Huh.
And I can't, there's no one specific moment where I got the idea. It's just a lot of noodling and playing with things. So,
Yeah. No. I mean, it's cool. It's one of the things that I notice is that um, there is not one way to be a cell sensitive. And that's something that I like because I like to see, ooh, well, we have this thing, but it's not always the same. It varies in following ways, and then it varies in the following unexpected ways. And sometimes it takes time for people who are creating such a system to start with, well, I got to have sensitives, right? And then to kind of let that concept grow into all of its variations.
right, because you have to think, okay, well, if you have somebody who can change the color, it's prismatic shifting, basically. Well, why can't they change the texture as well, the finer details? Why can't they make it look like it has depth to it instead of just a different shade? And it tends to follow each other, the different abilities.
Okay, so so there's sort of you kind of have a spectrum of people. Um,
Yeah, there's an underlying backbone that the people themselves are not necessarily aware of in world, but I have extensive notes.
you're the author, so you gotta know how this is working, right?
Exactly.
But it's kind of more fun if the people in the world don't know it, because then you leave the readers kind of picking up on little hints to
Yeah, and they
try
can
to figure
maybe
out.
figure things out themselves too.
Yeah, leaving mysteries for your readers. Cool. Well, so did you do a lot of research on volcanoes for this book?
I did, yeah. I did some geology in college, so there's a lot of refresher on that kind of thing. And to build my continent, I had to look at quite a bit into the crustal drifting and geothermal hotspots, upswelling, that kind of thing, because I wanted a continent roughly the size of Australia with many, many volcanoes on it. So
Uh-huh.
to do that, you have to have basically a series of interconnected hotspots and a crust above it moving very, very slowly, slower even than the Hawaii island chain is
Yeah.
formed by a hotspot, but that crust is moving a little faster than the one in my world because I need time for the rock to spread out and create a landmass instead of just a bunch of islands.
Right.
Very cool.
Please feel free, folks, to add your own questions to the discussion as you feel so inclined.
If you have multiple hotspots, you'd probably be more likely to get a continent.
Yes, it is a continent. That's precisely why I have multiple hotspots. I needed a fairly large continent with many volcanoes, so
And
multiple hotspots slow-moving crust. Lots of spreading.
Lots of spring. Are there lots of earthquakes?
There are. There weren't any in this book, but it is definitely an event that happens, and it has mythological implications to the native population there.
Okay, I'm going to totally ask you about that.
I really love that you used all that science in it. That's a geology, planetary science is a interest of mine. So
Glenda's totally going to read this, right? No. So yeah. Okay. So I'm intrigued by the mythological implication. Because I'm thinking of our visit with N.K. Jemisin when she was telling us about the seismic activity in the 5th season, and so it makes me want to create a sort of a contrast in my head and say, so how does that work for your for your people? Do they have so tell us a little bit, if you can, a little bit about beliefs surrounding earthquakes and what that looks like.
So the native population, the people who were there first, are the Qatari, and they have been more or less pushed off of their native land by the sort of invading empires. The Fire Mounts are obviously the most valuable land in the area outside of farming soil. So the Vlasian Empire came in, kicked them out, sent them to parts of the continent that aren't as seismically active because they are not near the Fire Mounts. And part of their belief system is that they will be able to take back their land when sort of the Fire Mounts open again and earthquakes happen. This isn't as present in Steal the Sky because there's only one Qatari character in that novel. This will come up more as the series progresses, which is why I'm hedging around it slightly.
Oh no, that's okay. That's okay. So legendarily, I guess you'd say they can
Right.
expect certain things. Cool. And so, just to link back to the other topic, are the cell sensitives present in both populations?
They are. The Qatari are more accepting of the wider variety of cell sensitives, except for a couple types that they tend to exile because they're particularly dangerous. It is sort of, it's not a genetic component, the cell sensitivity. It is more a groundwater environment. If you're around this all the time, you are likely, it is more likely that you will eventually develop the ability. So there are higher incidents of cell sensitive in the Qatari people. And when the Valathians first came down, they went, well, we really need cell sensitives to be able to move this stuff around, so we're going to interbreed a lot with these people and get cell sensitives of our own.
So they thought it was genetic then?
They did, yeah.
Interesting.
This is very much background, not a pretty part of the history. We're about 3 generations into the Valathian settlement when Steal the Sky starts. So there is a population on the continent that feels they are of the Scorched more than of the Qatari or the Valathian invaders.
Oh, okay.
So the Valathians had cell sensitives. The Qatari kind of think that maybe those were the people they exiled that had the power they didn't like, that maybe went up north and intermingled. So they think maybe that's how that got there, but that's not quite right. So their information is slightly raw.
That's right. And you know what? I think it's always important to have people be wrong about stuff in books.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
like, you know what I mean? Like, if you've got somebody who's got the whole thing worked out, then life's a little tricky.
That's no fun, yeah.
That's interesting, right? Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So,
sorry. They're making the best guesses with the information they have, and the information they have isn't complete. So.
And so, who named it the Scorched?
I named it the Scorched Continent. It seemed, well, of course I named it the Scorched Continent, but if you're talking in-world, the Valathians started calling it the Scorched Continent when they got there. They're from an archipelago area that is more jungly in nature, so it was very startling to them to see anything remotely like a Badlands.
Yeah. And it's pretty dangerous over there, right?
It is fairly dangerous. Yeah, it's that not only law-wise, they do have a system of watchers that sort of function as the local police force, but it is still an outpost area. It's a little lawless. It is easy to sort of slip in and out of certain facets of society without notice, which is why my con man protagonist operates fairly easily in this world.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about him?
He, where do I begin? In his past, okay, well, there's this thing in fantasy we see a lot where characters going through their everyday life, maybe they're have, budding relationships, that kind of thing, happening from their day to day. Everything's great. And then maybe they develop this power that they shouldn't necessarily have in their world. And usually at that point in your traditional fantasy story, the people who don't want him the power, want this person to have the power, coming to get him. And the people that are usually revolutionary resistance types swoop in at the last minute. Sometimes there's a princess in disguise and save him, and they take him off to be taught, the way of power and the resistance force. Well, they never showed up to save my con man protagonist. He went with the people who did not want him to have the power, and they did some not nice things to him to figure out maybe why he had this power. He actually escaped on his own and never quite met up with the resistance types. So he set off to do his own thing, which was mostly conning and harassing those people who are sort of in the higher echelons of power, which is the most he can do to kind of poke back at them for what they did to him. So by the time we meet him in Steal the Sky, he's getting ready to steal the airship of somebody who is very much in power.
Okay, and his motivation for doing that is because is it a con man's motivation, or is there a larger significance to the motivation?
His motivation is two-pronged. It is to sort of get back at the people who harmed him, and also he has a lot of anger issues. So part of what he does is his coping mechanism. So some things are slightly spoilerish there, but things become evident as the story moves on. He's doing what he does because he feels he must.
I'm getting an echo.
Oh.
I'm wondering where it might be coming from. Often it comes from...
Yeah.
You're not hearing it, Glenda? Okay.
I'm hearing an echo from you, too.
Is there an echo for you as well?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's take just a second and see if we can turn off and turn on again our microphones and see if it helps. I'm still hearing it.
How about now?
I can still hear it. Hey, so Raj, can you do me a favor? Can you mute your microphone for a second?
Speak.
Speak.
Testing.
Oh, that seems to be a little better. No, I'm still hearing it.
No, I hear the exact same thing. There's phasing going on.
So if I'm muting you, Raj, sorry.
Oh, no. He's trapped.
He's trapped, but I can't hear the echo anymore. Yeah. Okay, so Raj, I'm gonna keep you in the dark for a little while. and see if the problem goes away. Because it's hard for us to concentrate on the conversation if it's coming back at us at a slight delay. So I will apologize for that. Do you have your chat bar open by chance so that if you can share thoughts? Megan, if you look on the left menu bar up at the top is a blue icon for chat, and if you click on that, it'll show you the chat bar on the right-hand side, so in case Raj has something to say, we can keep our eye on that. Sorry, Raj. Okay, so he has anger that he needs to get out. Awesome. Always a good motivator. Let's see. So, all right, so we've got your main protagonist, and do you want to tell us about any of the other characters?
Sure, yeah, we've got Ripka, who is the female protagonist of the book. She has her own point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And she is the watch captain in town when Deaton comes and is stirring up trouble. And her primary motivation is to care for things. That is an intrinsic part of her. She grew up in a very low-income area of this continent. She watched basically refugees from the war come through, and she wants to keep stability in the city to keep things like that from happening.
Okay.
Yeah. And she is at one point she is faced with something that she finds morally abhorrent that she has to do to be able to keep peace in the city.
Faces tough moral decisions. Always an excellent thing to put in a story. I get a little bit of this vibe from what I read, but I'm not sure to what extent you might have been thinking about it. Was there almost like well, you talk about this is an outpost, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if there was any sort of, well, this is sort of like the Wild West or the edges of things kind of feeling for you as you were working with the world.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it has Western vibes to it. You know, like even just in the aesthetics, the long duster type coats and the big hats and that kind of thing. There's definitely a feeling of both desperation and hope in the city. Sort of that American expansion vibe of maybe we can do anything, but it's going to be pretty hard to do.
And is it an occupation situation with the invading empire, or are we already completely integrated in terms of just the populations have been living together for 3 generations and everybody's kind of accepted it already?
We're pretty much we're just on the cusp of full integration at this point.
Okay.
There is definitely friction between the two populations, as that's something you never really get rid of when you have this sort of situation.
Right.
But the empire is definitely put down its stakes, and it has interbred enough and erased enough of the elements of the culture they do not like that they very much have a stranglehold on the situation.
That's why it's so interesting, right?
Yes. Lots of opportunity for conflict there.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Did you have any did you have any particular models for your empire? I mean, models or realistic models or any sort of source material on that?
Nothing incredibly specific. I kind of stole bits and pieces from a lot of empires. Obviously, stole a little bit from England because they very much had the trade empire thing going on. Same with Portugal. I took a lot of sort of the Dutch, I hate to say this, but superiority when they came in and took over, areas. They had a way of doing things that was fairly oppressive, like most invading empires, and I borrowed a lot of motivation from them.
Well, I mean, there's nothing like history as a source of rich detail for modeling your world after.
Even if more detail is a little uncomfortable.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, because we want to have conflict in our books, right?
Right.
It's often useful to get influences from very uncomfortable places.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay, so are there only 2 points of view in the story?
There are, I say there's 2.5. There is 2.5, yeah. There is a third character who has a few points of view, not as many. That's maybe every 5 chapters or so she shows up. She is Katari, and she starts out. You think she's maybe a bad guy, and then you find out she's got some other motivations going on that. Yeah, she has some reveals that I'm not sure I want to give away here.
All right. I knew I was skirting the borderlines there.
Yeah.
That's okay. That's okay. I'm
got her own revenge to met out as a human, as a mother, and also as a Katari.
Multi-layer revenge.
Yes.
It's the tastiest kind.
It is. It's delicious.
And served cold, right?
Yeah. Well, not much is cold on this continent, but we'll go.
No, that's true. That's true. So I take it that these are human beings. I mean, because for all intents and purposes, as you meet them, you're saying, well, these are human beings. They're just living in a.
Yeah, I mean, it is a second world fantasy. It's one of those you assume humanoid evolution on a new planet in this case. Otherwise, I'd be writing science fiction, which I do, but not in this book.
Right. I mean, but I think in a lot of ways, what we are talking about is suggests that there are a lot of scientific influences in the book, and that the kind of magic use that you've got there is very principled. And so, despite the fact that that is fantasy, there's definitely a very solid science background to it, as we've already seen.
Yeah.
So,
some habits I can't let go of. I do love to sneak science into my fantasy as often as possible. So.
Cool, very cool. So, let's see. Is there are there other forms of science that you were able to use in here, or?
Well, the flight of the airships, for one. So being real honest, the traditional sort of airship that looks like, like the big Spanish galleon with the sails and, the giant beautiful wood body, doesn't work, scientifically speaking. The sails are great for ships. They're not so great when you are in the air, because you just a ship with sails just kind of floats along with wherever the wind takes them. There's no steering really involved.
Yeah.
So Celium sort of eliminated the problem of lift, which is important, but I also needed to have control capabilities. And I'm a private pilot myself, so I nerded out on this a little and put little. There's many pages of notes I have on this that aren't in the book for the sake of anybody else reading it who's interested in the story and not the nerdy stuff. But the ships actually have flight control surfaces. They have what are basically ailerons and propeller systems for propulsion and things like that. So I could get away with having the big cool image of the wooden ship belly with the sails on it, but also they have things that the people who build them called stabilizing wings, which are big accordion wings that fold out the body of the ship, and they look very much just to the people flying them. They look kind of like they're keeping the ship in balance, but really what they're doing is adding lift. They are airfoils in a way. And
cool. It sounds like you really went into that.
Yeah, there's a lot of complicated gear ratios to get the propellers to work right. Yeah.
But I mean, I think it's cool though that you would go so deep into the details of how the airships would achieve lift. I mean, clearly this is a situation where it's more like a ship in
Right.
the air as opposed to, a blimp
Yeah.
or a steampunk style airship.
Yeah, there's no dirigibles really. The closest thing you get is there are smaller crafts called flyers basically that look like say like the Chinese river barges. So
Okay.
lower profile or even well the Nile River barges, the ancient ones look very similar to this, and they do have a dirigible style buoyancy sac basically hovering above them. But they have similar flight control surfaces. They do have stabilizing wings. They have ailerons on the empennage, the tail part, and they do have propellers too for propulsion, which is very important when you're trying to go anywhere.
So I'm thinking that with all this research, we're going to have some really fun stuff go on with the ships as the story goes on. So very, very cool. Okay, so I want to I would like to give Raj a chance to ask his questions. He wanted to ask about about animal life.
Okay. So the Scorched is a very inhospitable place, as you can imagine. There is a monsoon season, however, and when that comes around, you get a lot more insect life. You get some water animals coming further inland, that kind of thing. As far as actual animal life during the bulk of the season on the continent, there's primarily a type of goat. There's quite a lot of marsupial-ish rats and that kind of thing. They have their own names in world, but they're rats. There are
Marsupial rats?
similar, yeah.
Oh. Awesome.
I like to kind of just invent things whole cloth sometimes, and I go a little off the rails with animals on occasion. But there are cats that hunt those animals, of course. Being the apex predators, there are not many of them, but there are rock cats, basically.
Okay, so are they like what size are they? Are they house cat sized or are they?
If you've seen a savanna cat, about that size, so slightly bigger than a house cat. I'd say lanky and maybe about. So just saw that question. Very similar. Yes, everything is slightly poisonous and aggressive. It is a place to live.
Awesome.
You need all the evolutionary advantages you can get. But yeah, the cats are, I'd say, maybe 20 pounds and lanky. That gives you an idea.
Awesome, but they're not poisonous, right?
No. Although, that is a good idea.
Oh, what have we unleashed?
That would be pretty sweet, actually. Like poisonous cats.
Poisonous cats. Yeah.
Okay, so that's a story idea for somebody.
There are actually there's a species of bee there. The insects tend to grow quite large because some of them do feed on little bits of psyllium they find, and it kind of expands the ability of the exoskeleton, basically. And there's a species of bee there that grows quite large and is very aggressive, similar to sort of the killer bee of Africa kind of thing, but a bit bigger. Yes.
How big is big?
Softball?
Softball-sized bees. Oh, nice.
They're big. Yeah, you don't want to meet them. There are also giant spiders for the same reason. Not giant like, drow underdark giant. We're not wolf.
Like a house cat size, maybe? That would be awesome. I want a giant spider.
Yeah, they're maybe as big as your face, I would say.
Okay, cool. I'll take it.
Face-sized spiders. Okay, that's awesome, Megan.
Yes, punchable bee size.
Bees the size of softballs and spiders that will fit right on your face.
You can really imagine it right there.
Yeah,
I
really
hate
brings
that,
it
like,
home.
the cockroaches must be.
You don't even want to know about that.
Awesome. So Raj's other question was about volcanic vugs. Am I right, Raj? I didn't mean to shut you up, dude. Okay, so let's see if I can.
What was that question? I'm sorry.
Uh, can you unmute yourself for a second, Raj, and we'll see if the problem is better, because I'd love you to be able to talk about this.
Well, there you are.
Yes, I seem to be. Yeah, I realized there was a setting that I could change that might get rid of the echo if this was what was causing it. Yeah, I was wondering with all those volcanic things, I wonder if you made use of volcanic bugs. Those little pockets where all sorts of minerals, gems can form. Really interesting.
There are what are essentially they look very much like boulder opals. There are basically psyllium stones that are formed under very, very high pressure and very rarely come to the surface. As far as insect life around volcanoes, there are some extremophile type things, but those are mostly just in my head because characters don't have microscopes and that kind of thing. So,
Yeah,
um,
yeah. It's
so although they are getting close to microscopes, technologically speaking, because they have glasses, and that's one step away from
right.
figuring out how to look at tiny things.
Well, you know, it's interesting. So they have glasses because these little tiny things are sometimes the things that you don't think about. I mean, I discovered, like, after I had written an entire book, that I had never actually once thought about whether people in the world had glasses.
Yeah, you kind of trap yourself sometimes world building with technology like that because you think, okay, well, if they have glasses, why don't they have telescopes? You know, this is a navigational empire. They're probably looking at the sky a lot. That only makes sense that they would extend it that direction.
Mm-hmm.
I know when I was um, about halfway through, I realized, like, well, a lot of these people are drinking out of glass bottles. There's a lot that goes into manufacturing glass bottle.
Yeah.
Make sure
That's
they
true. On
actually
the other hand,
had all the
you've got a
technology.
lot of volcanic material to work with, so that's not such
Yeah.
a improbable thing.
Exactly.
The Egyptians had a lot of glassware, but they didn't have glasses, so.
Yeah, they had something. Juliet might know about this actually. The faience glass, I believe that's how it's called, how it's pronounced. It wasn't a similar method to glass grinding like you would need for lenses. I can't remember exactly how they did it. Um, there's a beautiful collection at the Legion of Honor of it, but couldn't tell you how they made it.
Yeah. Well, you know, any kind of it's interesting when you're thinking about technology sets, right? If I have this, do I have to have that? Um, and most technologies are actually a convergence of several factors, right? So if you had glass, you wouldn't necessarily have to have lenses because you wouldn't necessarily have to have the knowledge behind it or the grinding or whatever it takes. So there is a lot of flexibility there.
Well, also getting glass sufficiently clear.
Right.
Right. That is very difficult to do. And also, world building tends to, for me anyway, everything sort of follows something else. So it's, yes, they've made glasses because they want to be able to read longer, and then I have to think about, well, why do they want to be able to read longer? There's always, what is this particular culture or that particular group of people, depending on who's doing the inventing, thinking about during that time? What is important to them?
Megan, can those people that are magic users that can manipulate that material, can they make it transparent?
They can.
In that case, making glasses wouldn't be such a problem because you make it out of that if it's safe.
Maybe you could. You'd have to hold it there permanently, so I think that might be more effort than it's worth.
Yeah.
You're constantly thinking about it.
Good excuse for goggles, though, right? Strap on.
Yeah, I gotta have the steampunk goggles, you know.
Right, right. Goggles are totally necessary, right?
Well, you're on an airship. It's pretty windy.
So I know that you have some very, very hot zones that people are um, having to cross or not cross.
Yes.
And if you're going to be crossing an area that's very, very hot, presumably there's some kind of technology of how to protect yourself from the heat that might also be implicated for mine workers and that sort of thing.
I presume you're talking about, excuse me, the blackwash that comes up earlier in the book.
The walk.
Yeah, that is smaller and unique to that city, so there's not a lot of extrapolated technology from it because they can just kind of cross it in little ferry airships. They use it primarily as a means of capital punishment. So they're not necessarily concerned about people being able to cross it safely.
I see.
It is something you can circumvent fairly simply unless you are dropped into the middle of it.
Ah. So people just go around it.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're doing any sort of normal commerce in the city, you just go around it, either the caravans that cross the continent or through the airships. You can go straight over it.
Right. What is it?
It is essentially, there's a lot of geyser activity in the area. So it is a fairly hot sort of aquifer underneath the ground, very deep. And on top of that is an unfortunate collection of shattered obsidian, which is very sharp, it's very hot, and holds heat really, really well. So if you're forced to walk across this thing, you lose your shoes fairly quickly, you will be blasted by the sun in the desert, you will be surrounded on all sides by heat. Heat exhaustion sets in very quickly, and it gets pretty grisly out there.
It gets grizzly. Ugh. Oh, Lordy.
If you're not a fan of graphic details, skip that section.
Oh, no, it's cool. It's like turning into Nightmare Barbecue.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
On that note, no.
Yeah, I know, exactly. But so the immediate feeling that I get when I start reading a book is that this is going to be a heck of a lot of fun. I mean, one of the things that I like to do on the show is I like to dive into deep into say, okay, well, how did you design this thing, and because I geek out about that stuff, right?
Oh yeah.
And I think, oh man, let's talk about this because that'd be so cool and whatever. But of course, there's also the plot. And what is a heists and hijinks plot without some very dire possible punishments and hanging out there for people to enjoy. Do you have a favorite thing about the world or the book?
My favorite thing, really, through the whole series is the relationship between the con man protagonist, Deaton, and his best friend. They're just buddies, and I don't think we get that often enough in fantasy. I love a good friendship. I really do, and I want to see more of it, which is part of why I wrote the book. It's one of those, you write what you can't find that you want, basically. Mm-hmm. And that friendship is solid.
Cool.
That's important.
Is it something where it's key to the plot gets tested, anything like that, or?
Yeah, they get tested multiple times over. It is a 3-book series, and they get tested multiple times over that series.
So you're saying that we're going to meet these guys again?
Yes.
Cool. Are you going to be looking? Are we going to visit other regions of the planet later?
Yeah, we're going to the second book is actually just finished. I'm getting ready to turn it in right now. It goes to the southern coast, which has a city that is it is still a fairly desolate environment, but it is also a coastal city. So it has different slightly different cultural mores and that sort of thing. Definitely different building structures. And part of the book also takes place on an island prison off the coast of that city. So that is a fairly different setting in fantasy.
Do we get a peek at the source of the empire, or at any point?
Book 3, there should be some scenes in the empire there, according to my outline.
Yeah, cool. Well, so hopefully that outline will stand you in good stead, and we won't be disappointed by sudden lack of peeks into the empire. But honestly, you're in control here. So if it's not appropriate for us to see the empire, then it's not appropriate for us to see the empire, as they say.
There are some novellas planned. There's ones with my agent right now. So some of those will go further into the empire as well.
Cool.
So we'll get sort of auxiliary stories surrounding the main trilogy's arc through those.
Okay, well, so we're almost at the end of our hour, so I'm going to ask the other folks here whether they have any questions that they would like to ask you before we wrap things up. Often there's nothing because we have just so thorough.
Giant bugs!
We have bees and lava and all kinds of things.
Yeah, it's definitely not your traditional medieval fantasy world.
Very good.
So much the better, right?
Right, yeah.
Awesome. Okay, well, I guess we're just gonna say so it's coming out in January, right?
Yep, January 5th.
January the 5th.
The ebooks are on sale right now. If you read Nook or Kindle, they'll be on sale through the 18th. I think they're $2.99.
Cool.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
All right.
Barnes & Noble is doing this 12 Days of Christmas thing, and they actually put a flash story written by me up today to help celebrate that.
Wow, a flash story. That's cool.
Yeah, it's about Mrs. Claus.
Okay, that works then. Okay, so we'll have our eyes out for the January release, and maybe pop over for ebooks or something like that. Thank you so much for coming here and telling us about your book. This is going to be really fun.
Thanks for having me and for letting me geek out about the world building stuff.
Well, yeah.
That's what we do here.
All right, I'm going to stop the broadcast.
All right.